Up Acting Assistant Attorney General John Cronin. Mr. Cronin supervises the criminal division's more than 600 federal prosecutors who conduct investigations and prosecutions involving organized and transnational crime, gang violence, and other crimes. He'll make a statement regarding MS-13, then take a few of your questions on this topic, and then I'll be back after that to finish and answer questions on the news of the day. Thanks, guys. John.
Good afternoon. Again, my name is John Cronin. I am the Acting Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice. Before serving in my current role, I supervised the Terrorism and International Narcotics Unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Prior to that, I served as an Assistant United States Attorney in the Southern District of New York, where I prosecute violent criminals and I prosecuted national security defendants, including Osama bin Laden's son-in-law and the attempted Times Square bomber. On the day that Attorney General Jeff Sessions was sworn in, President Trump sent him executive orders to reduce crime in America and to target transnational organized crime. As Acting Assistant Attorney General, I support the Attorney General in accomplishing these goals by directing the enforcement of all federal criminal laws, with the exception of those that are specifically designated to other divisions of the Department of Justice. As Sarah mentioned, my duties include oversight of the nearly 700 prosecutors in the criminal division, and that includes the organized crime and gang section, the capital case section, the International Criminal Investigative Training Assistance Program, and the Office of Overseas Prosecutorial Development, Assistance, and Training. I had the opportunity just now to brief President Trump about one of the most significant threats to the public safety of our communities, MS-13. And I appreciate the opportunity to also speak with you today about that threat. MS-13, or Mara Salvatrucha, has grown to more than 30,000 members worldwide, 10,000 of whom live right here in the United States, spanning 40 states and the District of Columbia. This violent, murderous gang has infiltrated our country. It is estimated that there are 2,000 members in Los Angeles, between 800 and 1,200 members in Dallas and Houston, 2,000 members on Long Island, between 800 and 1,200 members in Boston, and approximately 3,000 members living right here in Washington, D.C., and the D.C. metropolitan area. As I'm sure many of you, not all of you know, MS-13 is probably the most violent and ruthless gang terrorizing our streets today. Their motto is Mata, Viola, Controla, which means kill, rape, control. It is this motto and indiscriminate violence that MS-13 lives and rules by. They commit rape, robbery, extortion, and murder, often just for the sake of it. They attack their victims with chains, bats, machetes, firearms. MS-13 recruits children to be murderers. They gang rape young girls and sell them for sex. I briefed the President on a few examples of MS-13's brutality. These include a 15-year-old Gaithersburg, Maryland girl named Damaris Reyes Rivas, who was stabbed 13 times with knives and a wooden stake. The girl's killers filmed her murder so they could show gang leaders back in El Salvador what they had done. Damaris's body was savagely dumped next to railroad tracks under the same road, the Beltway, that many of us take to work every day. I briefed the President about the MS-13 members who murdered a fellow gang member they believed to be a snitch, and who murdered a recruit for violating gang rules. One of those individuals had his head severed. MS-13 buried those two victims in shallow graves in a park in Falls Church, Virginia, a park just about 10 miles from here. I briefed the president about a Long Island victim who was lured into the woods of central Islip, New York by MS-13 members, where he was beaten with sticks and a fire extinguisher. The gang members ultimately cut his throat with a pocket knife and sadistically stuffed his body into a drainage pipe where it went undiscovered for months. The Department of Justice, under the leadership of Attorney General Sessions, is devoting resources to accomplishing the President's directive of reducing violent crime and ensuring that our citizens are no longer held hostage by murderous savages like MS-13 members. Attorney General Sessions has designated MS-13 a priority for the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. The Department of Justice will be surging hundreds of federal prosecutors, new federal prosecutors, to the field specifically to focus on violent crime and immigration offenses. The department has enhanced our relationships with the Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, to target MS-13. This past summer, Attorney General Sessions visited El Salvador, where he met with the El Salvadoran Attorney General, Douglas Melendez, to discuss joint efforts to dismantle MS-13 at its roots. Soon after that meeting, about 70 gang members were charged in El Salvador. And in total, our work with our Central American partners had thus far resulted in the arrests or charges against more than 4,000 suspected MS-13 members. The Justice Department, in coordination with our partners on the state and local level, will continue to prosecute scores of MS-13 gang members located in the United States. But because MS-13 is based and operates in El Salvador, and because MS-13 largely directs its murderous mission from prisons out there in El Salvador, we must do more than enforce our domestic violent crime laws against gang members in the United States. Our investigations have revealed that when we fail to enforce our immigration and human smuggling laws, when we fail to enforce immigration laws and allow for loopholes to exist to let future MS-13 gang members into the country, MS-13 can very easily simply replenish its jailed membership by sending more gang members across our borders. And for that reason, as well, the Department of Justice also remains committed to enforcing our criminal immigration laws and to identifying and targeting MS-13's smuggling networks. Be clear, we will undertake all lawful measures to end this scourge on our communities. Thank you for your attention.
John, real quick question.
I had a question, yeah. Given the threat that you're discussing here, why has Attorney General Sessions renewed a sort of increase in enforcement against marijuana, even though a lot of states have tried to decriminalize or make it legal?
Sure. I'm not able to talk much detail into the marijuana policy, but I will say that there are a number of policies that the Department of Justice is pursuing on any given day. As the Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division, I've certainly seen the harm that marijuana can do. But more importantly, the priorities here are not at the expense of any resources being addressed in the marijuana policy. And with respect to MS-13, the Attorney General has made clear that he is devoting sufficient resources and additional resources to ensure that the districts, the U.S. Attorney's Office, have the prosecutors necessary to address the scourge in our communities.
You do have finite resources, correct? So why put a priority again in an area that had been deprioritized and had not been considered nearly the threat that this kind of violence you're talking about is?
Well, we're dealing with multiple priorities any day at the Department of Justice. A matter of allocating resources. There will be sufficient resources targeting MS-13, and we will continue to devote those resources to that threat. Yes.
People in this community have been reading about MS-13 since 2006. Mm-hmm. Is it your position that the previous two administrations, Bush and Obama, simply did not prioritize this, or is it much worse now than it was then, and therefore it is justified to have the focus you're describing here today?
Yeah, MS-13, you're correct, has certainly been around for some time. I do think we've seen a significant uptick in their violence in the past several years. When you're looking at the acts of atrocities they've committed, both in the local communities here and really across the country, I think it's a new threat. And unlike one we've really seen from a violent transnational organized crime that is operating on United States soil. MS-13, like I said in my remarks, is not only has 10,000 members in the United States, but they are across the country in 40 states and the district. We have MS-13 prosecutions going on in Virginia, New York, LA, Texas, all around the country. And
did the previous two administrations not appreciate this? Let this grow? Let this become a bigger problem?
Well, I can't talk to the priorities of the previous administrations. I can talk to the priorities here, and combating and targeting MS-13 is the top priority of this administration, of this Department of Justice. But in order to effectively target MS-13, it's not enough that federal and state authorities are enforcing the criminal laws with respect to MS-13 members on U.S. soil. We also have to make sure that MS-13 is not in a position to replenish its ranks by sending additional members or additional unaccompanied children into the United States who will later be recruited by MS-13 to be their murderers in a few years down the road. Unless we're able to do that, we'll be in a constant situation where MS-13 will be reconstituting its ranks with us able to effectively eradicate it from U.S. society.
Two questions.
Yeah.
Last year, President Trump talked about MS-13. We saw some graphic detail about MS-13. Now you've given the President an update. What beyond the immigration issue will the Justice Department be doing to break the back of MS-13? That's the first question.
Sure.
You can answer.
Well, the first question is that the Department of Justice has been and will continue to dedicate considerable resources to ensure that MS-13 is being targeted, and I think we're seeing that that's working. Last year, the Department of Justice secured more convictions against, secured convictions against 1,200 gang members. We charged the most federal firearms offenses in a decade. We brought more cases against violent criminals in at least a quarter of the century. So domestically, that is what we're doing, and we're going to continue that. I mentioned the additional prosecutors that are going to be sent out to the field. There are additional prosecutors going out to specific areas where MS-13 is a problem, and we will enforce our robust criminal statutes that allow us to target a variety of conduct: robbery, racketeering, murder, drug trafficking, to get them off our streets. Another important component too is capacity building. One focus, like I mentioned, is working with our partners in the Northern Triangle countries, in Central America. We provide training down there to their law enforcement and their prosecutors, and whatever systems we can to make sure they are able to target MS-13 at the roots in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, before that threat hits United States soil. So it's a multi-tiered attack that the Department of Justice is undertaking.
My second question on another issue, and I'm glad you're here today. The Eric Garner case, it's still out there, and people are waiting for an indictment. His mother is looking for justice. He cried out 11 times, "I can't breathe." What's new? What's happening? What should we expect on that case?
With respect to that case, I have no update that I'll be able to share. I think it would be better directed at others, maybe in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
But it's in the criminal. We understand it is in the criminal department, the criminal portion of of Justice. So, I mean, is there any movement at all? Because I'm hearing that there should have been an indictment.
And I apologize, but to the extent an ongoing investigation exists, I'm not able to talk beyond that at this point. I apologize. Yes, please.
John, in the cabinet room where you gave your first presentation, the whole MS-13 issue was wrapped up in the need to increase border enforcement, to change our immigration laws. Did you have any idea how many of the 10,000 gang members of MS-13 in this country are here legally, and how many are here illegally?
It's hard to put a statistic on that number because often they are not caught and they enter the country without us knowing. But I would give one example as kind of a snapshot of what we are seeing. This past November, the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security announced the results of Operation Raging Bull. Operation Raging Bull was our enhanced efforts to target MS-13, and it culminated in the arrest of about 267 arrests, both in the United States and in El Salvador. In the United States, there were 214 arrests. 94 of them were on criminal charges for federal or state for murder, racketeering, robbery, firearms, and many other offenses. Of the 214 individuals arrested in the United States, 198 were foreign nationals, and only 5 of those 198 had legal status in the United States, and 64 of those had illegally crossed the border as unaccompanied children, and many of whom have since become adults. So I do not have a number to give you or statistics to give you, but I think that snapshot from Operation Raging Bull gives a sense of the extent of the problems.
John?
Yes.
Isn't it true that MS-13 makes up just a small fraction of gang members in this country, though?
I don't know what percentage of gang members it makes up, but the Department of Justice efforts, obviously targeting violent gangs, is not limited to MS-13. We have numerous prosecutions going on around the country into violent subsets of the Bloods, of a group called the 9 Trade Gangsters. Not too long ago, we announced charges against the Mongols motorcycle gang. There are many gang prosecutions going around the country. And this is not to say that MS-13 is the only threat we face. That's certainly not the case. But MS-13 is a unique threat. It is violence for the sake of violence. It is indiscriminate killing. It is brutality that is terrorizing our communities. And it's also a threat that is very tough to stop because we're in a position where MS-13 is able to replenish its ranks as we incarcerate its members in the United States.
Few people would certainly argue with that characterization that MS-13 targets communities in this country, but what would you say to critics who say you're using this gang to basically paint a very broad brushstroke against immigrants and scare people here?
I think if we look at the reality of the actions of MS-13 in the D.C. metropolitan area, in Long Island and around the country, the scare attacks being used are not by the Department of Justice, they're by MS-13. It is a brutal gang of savages that is engaging in indiscriminate violence in our communities.
Local law enforcement says.
I just want to ask him.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Brian. I'll let you get to Brian's question if you have some time. You talked about the Attorney General's leadership here, Jeff Sessions, what he's been doing in fighting this gang problem. And I want to ask about somebody else who's a leader of the DOJ, Rod Rosenstein. Sure. Are you comfortable with his leadership? Do you believe the rank and file are comfortable? Do you believe he's being unfairly maligned by the president?
I will. I'm here to talk about MS-13 and asked to stay on that topic, but I will say that Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, as a former U.S. Attorney in Maryland, is someone who saw firsthand the devastating effects of MS-13 on his district. He is someone with an intricate understanding of the threat, and he shares the Attorney General's commitment to targeting the threat, and he's very supportive of our efforts targeting MS-13.
So my question, if you may, really quick, may we, look, local law enforcement, one of the biggest problems local law enforcement has is that they believe that your particular rules and what you're doing now are actually causing more problems because people in the immigrant communities are afraid to come forward and testify against MS-13 because they believe they're going to be deported if they do so. Can you at least give them any assurance that the immigrant communities, particularly in Gaithersburg, Maryland, you brought that one up and people had The police in Montgomery County had a difficult time getting people to come forward as witnesses because they were afraid they would be deported if they did so. So your own rules, your own, what you're doing is scaring people away. Can you address that?
Well, I think local law enforcement largely is supportive of the department's efforts to target MS-13 to the extent individuals are scared to testify against MS-13 members. I think you need to look no further than MS-13 targeting people perceived as snitches and putting them in shallow graves. It's not because of the actions of the Department of Justice.
No, but they're afraid that you're going to ship them out and deport them if they do. That's a real fear. They've expressed that fear.
And there are opportunities for immigration relief if someone does have a real fear and is providing testimony, and they could pursue that relief as well in the appropriate circumstances.
Do you see where that might be a problem, though, in prosecuting the case?
We always deal with situations of cooperating witnesses and having to deal with fears by cooperating witnesses, and we address those fears as appropriate.
One more, please, John. One more, please. Just one more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. On a few lighter subjects to cover, and then I'll take your questions. As you all probably saw earlier this morning, First Lady Melania Trump announced the initial details for the 140th White House Easter egg roll. The event will take place Monday, April 2nd on the South Lawn. Families with children 13 years old and younger are invited to join the President, First Lady, White House staff, and their families for a day of festivities. Tickets are free to the public and can be requested through an online system, opening this Friday, February 9th, and closing Thursday, February 15th. As in the past years, the White House will also select volunteers for the egg roll through an online application. Submit their names through whitehouse.gov. The deadline for applying is February 23rd. Over the last year, I've occasionally taken the opportunity to share some letters to the President written by people from all over the country, from Pickle to Frank the Lawnmower. I've especially enjoyed introducing you all to some hardworking young Americans with incredibly bright futures. Today, I have another letter to share, this one from Natalie Elder Dalton from Clarksburg, Maryland. She writes, "Dear Mr. President, I'm Natalie, and I'm 11 years old, almost 12. My cousin Celia, who is 8 years old, and have loved to cook since we practically were born. If you don't believe me, check out the pictures we've enclosed. We are more than cousins, we are best friends. From the time we were very little, we've helped our Nona in the kitchen, therefore we are very good cooks for little girls. The reason I'm writing is to offer you an amazing opportunity. We would love to cook for you and your family at your home, or you're most welcome to come to my house if you prefer. It would be such an honor to make you a meal. We don't think you get many home-cooked meals since you are always so busy, and we read that you only sleep 4 hours a night. Please call us and let us cook for you. Love, Natalie. P.S. Our Pop says that you are doing a great job. Thank you for keeping us safe." Natalie, I'm happy to tell you that I talked to the President about your letter this morning, and he and the First Lady would like to take you up on your very kind offer. We have an amazing kitchen and culinary staff here at the White House, and the President and First Lady would like for you to come over and work alongside them sometime very soon. He said to tell your Pop and Nona hello, and to tell your mother congratulations for raising such a brave and talented little girl. Most importantly, he said to tell you to always believe in yourself and know that in America you can achieve anything through hard work, determination, and perseverance. And sometimes you just have to take a chance and put yourself out there. That's exactly what you did with your letter, and we're excited to meet you in person soon. And with that, I will take your questions.
Senator, on the President's shutdown comments a few minutes ago, a few weeks ago he said that a shutdown would be devastating to the military. Does he now feel that a shutdown would be worth it even if members of the U.S. military were negatively impacted?
Look, the only people that have caused a shutdown are the Democrats who have repeatedly held the government hostage over their own politics. Democrats actually shut the government down. Let's not forget that just a couple weeks ago. The president isn't looking for this, but if the Democrat Party is going to continue to threaten a shutdown because they won't include responsible immigration reforms, including fixing MS-13 loopholes and other issues, then the president welcomes that fight. It's a fight we won last time, and it's one we're very confident that we would win again. But let me repeat, our goal is to get a 2-year budget deal and to also get a deal on immigration, which we have laid out. The president has generously laid out a plan that addresses both Republicans and Democrats' concerns, and we're hopeful we'll come to an agreement on both of those fronts.
But isn't the president encouraging a shutdown here?
The president's encouraging people to do their jobs. The president's encouraging them to get a deal on the budget as he's laid out, a 2-year, a long-term budget deal that actually helps our military instead of doing these short-term deals. That's what he's advocated for all along. And the president is encouraging them to do their jobs and come to an agreement on immigration, particularly the 4 places that he's outlined that have to happen in any piece of legislation.
Hey, but can you then clarify, would the president rather see a shutdown or a short-term spending fix this week?
Look, again, we are not advocating for the shutdown. That's the fault of the Democrats not being willing to do their jobs. The president wants a long-term deal, and he wants to get a deal on immigration. And we hope that Democrats will come to the table and get those things done.
And then I'm hoping you can clarify one other thing. Chief of Staff John Kelly said today that some Dreamers were, quote, too lazy to get off their asses to register for DACA protections. Is that the position of this White House, that Dreamers are lazy? Who thinks this?
The position of the White House is that we want to fix a problem that was created by the previous administration. We have a system that is not lawful. We have a system that has a lot of legal loopholes and has a very large national security concern. We want to address it completely. We want to solve the problem on DACA. And we want to solve the border security issue. We want to end chain migration. We want to end the visa lottery system. What we don't want to do is continue kicking the can down the road. We're focused on actually getting a solution. And frankly, I think if anybody's lazy, it's probably Democrats who aren't showing up to work and aren't actually getting to the table to make a deal on this.
Sarah, what did the president make of the stock market's volatility yesterday and today? And does he have any regrets about taking responsibility or credit for the stock market's rise?
Look, the economy is incredibly strong right now. The president's focus continues to be on the long-term economic fundamentals, which, like I just said, are very strong in this country. We're infinitely better off today than where we were before the president took office, particularly on the economy. We have historically low unemployment, and we actually have increasing wages for American workers. There's nothing that's taken place over the last couple of days in our economy that's fundamentally different than it was 2 weeks ago, and we're very comfortable with where we are right now.
Does he have any second thoughts about taking credit for it when the stock market goes up?
Does the president have second thoughts about taking credit for a booming economy? Absolutely not. Jordan.
Thanks, Sarah. Has the president had a chance to review the memo from the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee, and is he inclined to release it?
The president has seen the memo. He met with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, within the last hour to discuss some of the differences between the 2 memos. And we are undergoing the exact same process that we did with the previous memo, in which it will go through a full and thorough legal and national security review. We're in the middle of that process. When that's completed, the president will be given a thorough briefing on the findings of the different organizations and stakeholders that are involved, and we'll make a determination at that time.
The review concluded last time. The president had made it clear to lawmakers that he was inclined to release the Republican memo. Has he made any kind of similar comments to you guys about the Democratic memo?
The president made the comment that we're going to go through the same process that we went through the first time, and that'll take several days to complete as it did the first time, and we'll make a determination at that point. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. The president on the Republican memo says that it completely vindicates him. And this weekend we heard from Trey Gowdy, who is on the Intelligence Committee, who had a large part in writing that memo. In what way does the president believe that the Republican memo vindicates him?
Look, the president has consistently called the Russia investigation politically motivated witch hunt for the last year, and the memo clearly vindicates the president's position that there was political bias in this process. It's pretty simple. Major?
Sarah, I would think it's fair to say that many members of the Senate, including Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, were surprised by the president's comments, so I'd like to see if I can figure out exactly what he was driving at. Is the president saying that unless there's an immigration compromise that he is satisfied with, he will not sign the emerging budget compromise on a 2-year budget deal that McConnell and Schumer are working out? Or will he deal with that separately from the budget talks that are going now, and both of those are making substantial progress?
As I've said, we want a 2-year budget deal. We'll see what this looks like. We certainly are supportive of Republicans and Democrats coming to a deal. We also want a deal on immigration.
They have to be together.
They're not mutually exclusive. The president wants to get a deal on both of those.
Will he sign a
fronts.
budget deal that does not include immigration policy reforms?
I don't think that we expect the budget deal to include specifics on the immigration reform, but we want to get a deal on that. As we've said, we don't want to hold the government hostage over these items.
So,
Krista.
can I ask you one other thing about, Senator Flake said something on the Senate floor just a minute ago. I want to give you a chance to respond. He said, and I quote,
Sure, this will be eventful.
I have seen the president's most ardent defenders use the now weary argument that the president's comments were meant as a joke, just sarcasm, only tongue-in-cheek. But treason is not a punchline. Can you say for the sake of the future that you agree with Senator Flake on that, that treason or treasonous is not a punchline, is not a joking matter?
Look, honestly, I'm not going to respond directly to Senator Flake's comments. I don't really care what Senator Flake has to say. I don't think his constituents do either, and I think that's why his numbers are in the tank. The president was clearly joking with his comments, but what isn't a joke is that Democrats refuse to celebrate the accomplishments of last year that has helped all Americans. What I don't understand, and what I don't think the country understands, is why Democrats are so upset about lower taxes and higher wages. That's something that every American should be celebrating, not crying about, not sitting on their hands for. Democrats are going to have to make a decision at some point really soon. Do they hate this president more than they love this country? And I hope the answer to that is no.
I want to ask you a question about.
I'll come back to you.
Thanks,
Stephen.
Sarah. I want to ask you a question about stocks. On the positive economic news, there is a school of thought among economists that given the current growth in the economy, to inject the economy with stimulus in the tax cuts could actually spark inflation.